meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Colonel Thomas Edward Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, once said, "A Rolls in the desert is above rubies." His reference for this statement was Proverbs 31, verse 10, where the same value is given to a virtuous wife. Did Lawrence of Arabia prize a mere armored car with the passion and dependence that a man would have for a woman that truly completes him? And if so, why? Of course, Lawrence was speaking of no mere armored car. The Rolls-Royce Model 4050, which would be known as the Silver Ghost soon after its debut, was designed by Henry Royce and offered for sale in 1907. Being a tireless perfectionist, Royce had been designing car after car in his pursuit for the ultimate driving machine. But Claude Johnson decided to put some reins on Henry, and the order was given: no more new car models. If Royce wanted to make the perfect car, he'd have to perfect this one. By 1914, Royce designed quite a few upgrades for the Silver Ghost. The engine displacement increased from about 700 cc's to 7,400. Transmissions went from 4-speed to 3, then back to 4. Electric lighting was added, and through tweaking of the engine internals, horsepower had just about doubled. With harmonic balancers, dual ignition, and sprung suspension on all axles, the Silver Ghost was advertised as the best car in the world, and it was hard to prove that wrong. When the Great War broke out in 1914, car production pretty much ceased soon after in Europe amongst the belligerents, as their factories were requisitioned for the war effort. Unlike in the USA, armored cars had been tried and tested in Europe prior to the war, and so there were some, though not Rolls-Royces, already in service in various militaries. Rolls-Royce had a dozen or so completed chassis in the warehouse at the time, so in September of 1914, they were requisitioned to be converted into armored cars. Within 3 months, the first 3 prototype Silver Ghost armored cars were presented to the British officials. The Admiralty Air Department, which was tasked to explore and develop aircraft technology for battlefield uses, was assigned to head up the project, as they had experience in converting civilian machines to military use. A certain Commander Hetherington headed up the project in cooperation with the Vickers Company, and despite the haste, presented a solid design. Since the car would exceed 4 tons in total weight, the rear axle was given 4 tires to support it and bigger leaf springs. Otherwise, the chassis was the same civilian design that was current at the time, which was based on the latest version that had won the Alpine trials the previous year. The entirety of the car was armored in nearly 1/2-inch thick arsenic-hardened plate armor and was proof against any small arms fire and even its own. A Navy-issue .303 Vickers machine gun was mounted in an armored turret at the top, and additional ports were available for handheld weapons to be used from within the car when needed. Despite the weight, the car proved to handle well. The Alpine version had only 80 horsepower, but a 4-speed transmission that was grannied to get it moving and had the legs to cruise. The suspension upgrade made it ride with something resembling comfort and still be easy to steer. The chassis was stout, and so the turret had no binding issues when traversing while the car was moving. All the problems that plagued armored cars up to that time had vanished in the Rolls, except one. She was heavy. The Western Front had devolved into a muddy mess, and no matter how great the car was, they just couldn't be useful in that terrain. But there was another front, the Middle Eastern theater, where the Allies were facing the Ottomans, where there was no mud. And in the sands of Persia, the best car in the world would prove to be the best armored car in the world, if not of all time. It was not Lawrence of Arabia who first used these cars to fame, but Hugh Grosvenor, the second Duke of Westminster, In 1916, a number of British sailors had been shipwrecked near Egypt and subsequently captured by the enemy. They were held in an encampment at Bir Asiso, and the Duke took a squadron of 9 armored cars and, despite being very outnumbered, wreaked havoc. Moving at speed and guns blazing, they scattered the encampment. He even reported that camels loaded with munition tend to explode when fired upon, and he freed the sailors. He wasn't done. Hearing that more such prisoners were held at other camps, His Grace charged on some 120 miles through the desert to Bir Hakeim, and the defenders fled at the onslaught of the ghosts of war. All of the sailors were rescued, and both the Duke and the car became legendary. For a 4-ton mass of armor and firepower to actually drive without any issues over 120 miles through the heat and sand of a desert was unthinkable until it actually happened. The news of this spread and reached the ears of T.E. Lawrence. In late 1917, he secured an unexpected and very welcome Allied victory at the Battle of Aqaba, and he had ideas to exploit this advantage. He requested and received a squadron of 8 Silver Ghost armored cars to continue his guerrilla campaign. Like Grosvenor, Lawrence found the car to be perfect for desert fighting. Fast, powerful, quiet, and unfailing. Using the cars in lightning raids like the cavalry of old, his steel steeds never failed him or his men. Rolls-Royce continued to produce the Silver Ghost during the war for armored cars until 1917, when they focused on making aircraft engines. 120 in total were built and were so reliable that some even saw service in World War II. In the deserts, the Rolls proved to be a car you could rely on to do what you needed her to do without question or complaint, and do it on the battlefield. And for any man to have such steadfast loyalty at his side when surrounded by war is truly a treasure above rubies. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.